Hey, it's the Soul Whisperer, Amy Shaw here, and I want to talk today about the wounded healer, the bodhisattva, what that is, how it relates to me and my practice and who I am, my expression of shamanism, you know, in the whole spectrum of the facets of the archetype. The reason this is coming up for me is that last week I went to a screening here in Austin, Texas, for a documentary at the Austin Film Society, and it's a story about a Buddhist monk from the Zen sect of Buddhism in Japan. He is a Japanese man, and just basically his life, what he does, and how he came into Buddhism, and how serving as a monk, or essentially as a bodhisattva, how it is affecting him, his life, his health, and it just the work that he was trying to do. So it was really, really interesting. Being a Westerner, I tend to be very resistant to Buddhism. That's partly because it is a very Eastern mindset, and I feel that a lot of Buddhism as it's represented in the West is tainted by our Western, logical, rational, materialist way of thinking, that real left brain way of thinking. And the people in the East, we're a relatively new country. We haven't been around very long. The people in the East, the Buddhist countries, they've been around for centuries and centuries and centuries. So they have this more evolution and this way that they express themselves. And I think it's so ingrained in their culture. And it's not ingrained in our culture. So, for example, I'm much more of a processor. The alchemists, the European alchemy traditions resonate a lot more with me. They make more sense to me. I can translate that better. It just resonates with me all the way around more than Buddhism. And I think a lot of that has to do with because who I am. I'm a processor. So if I'm going through something really difficult, I'm processing it, and it takes time, it takes effort, it takes work. And then you have somebody that's coming along who's a Buddhist, and they'll just tell you, let it go, or don't be attached, or, they have this very Buddhist philosophy and way of approaching situations in life. And it's difficult for me to relate to that, because I am the type of person that has to not let stuff go, but grab onto stuff. I need to grab onto it and internalize it and process it, sort of go through it and work it out and make it meaningful in my life. So because of that, I've tended to shy away from Buddhism when it kind of comes at me from people, talking about it or trying to, say that I need to apply it somehow in my life. I have been less than willing to accept it. And then not having the first-hand experience of Buddhism, trying to, read about it on the internet or read about it in articles, it falls flat. I come from that place where first-hand experience is the key, to feeling something out if it resonates with you or not. And so just reading about it, it's hard for me to wrap my head around it. And again, I think these ideas of karma and what it means to be a bodhisattva and just attachment and suffering and all these things that we hear about in Buddhism, Dharma, I think that this gets confused and reinterpreted in a very Western way. So because of all those reasons, I've been, shying away, not so keen on learning a lot about Buddhism, a little bit here and there, but it's definitely not something that I've tried to absolutely follow in my own life. And then I started hearing more and more about the bodhisattva. And again, I looked it up a little bit on the internet, read a little bit about it, still didn't get a really clear idea of what a bodhisattva was, and even how that might relate or translate with shamanism. Where those two things interface, how are they alike, how are they different, and all that kind of stuff. I just couldn't really wrap my head around it because it just seemed like some concept that I didn't even know anything about. And reading about it didn't really give me more of a fullness. I have to learn from experience. So I went to this viewing and stayed for the panel discussion afterwards. I was actually invited by a therapist friend, and so the movie theater was completely, they had no seats. In fact, they were bringing in extra chairs and fitting them along the aisles and whatnot. And the panel discussion, it was 3 psychotherapists and a moderator. I believe he worked for the movie theater. And so it was really interesting hearing them talk about the film afterwards, but also, watching it, I learned a lot about Zen Buddhism and about what it means to be a bodhisattva. So I just want to give a really quick movie review on that. So his work primarily is working with suicidal people there in Japan, and the suicide rate in Japan is extremely high. So this sense of hopelessness, this loss of purpose, this struggling and suffering is a dominant theme in the Japanese culture and Japanese lives and families. And so this Zen monk, who wasn't a religious man growing up. I mean, he grew up with a sense of rebelliousness, and, essentially he's the wounded healer. He's what I would call the wounded healer. And he somehow just fell into the priesthood or into this path of, serving as a monk. And essentially he became a bodhisattva. And so it really did help me, because afterwards in the panel discussion, they were discussing this and the word bodhisattva came up. And that's where the connection was for me. Not reading about it, but actually seeing it in this man's example in his life and how he was serving. And then her, in the panel talking about how he's a bodhisattva. I went, aha, now I understand. Because in the film, it's called The Departure because he held a workshop that he calls The Departure, where he invites people in and basically invites them to pretend, suicidal people, invites them to pretend that they're dead. So he goes through this series of, write down 6 things, 9 things, now get rid of, basically essentially all of them one by one, and that's death. And it's a whole workshop. It goes beyond that, but that's one element of it. And he calls that The Departure. His workshop's called The Departure. So that's why the film was titled that. And in this film, he's going through these motions of caring for these suicidal people who are calling him on the phone at all hours, who are emailing him at all hours, who are texting him at all hours. And when they do this, they're desperate. They're like at that last rope of hope of like, I just want to die. And you're the only person that I can call and reach out to in this situation. So he's constantly at all hours responding through his media channels, but also getting on his motorcycle and driving all over the place to meet with these people in person. And so we're going through and seeing him doing this. And as he's doing this, he's also suffering from health conditions himself. And he's going to the doctor and more and more and more. And, he has a small child, probably about a 2-year-old child. And, his wife's getting frustrated because she never sees him. He's not spending time with the child. When he does finally spend time with the child is less responsive to him than, the family would like, because the child isn't accustomed to being around his dad. And so, it goes through this whole aspect of his life and how much he truly is sacrificing and being in service to these suicidal people, and how his family's suffering, how his health is suffering. And at one point his mother-in-law sits down with him and tells him, basically, I think you're being a hypocrite because you're trying to serve people and teach them how to be strong, but you're doing it from a position of being weak yourself. She tells him that because of his health, because he's not taking care of himself, that it's wrong for him to then try to take care of other people. And he basically he listens to what she has to say, but then he basically tells her, well, too bad. I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to quit. And then it goes on where he talks about his value in life is not for so much a long life, but for a life of meaning, a life of purpose. And so he fully was aware of what his sacrifices were, what he was giving up, even his health and his ability to self-care. He was giving these things up. His family, his relationship with his wife, his relationship with his child. These were things that he was willingly sacrificing to be of service to, people that were suffering and that needed help. So in essence, he was saying, this is my purpose. This is my life. If you take that away from me, I have no purpose. And so it was really an interesting conundrum, and it's something that I could really, really relate to as the wounded healer. A lot of people will say that because as wounded healers, we have this tendency to not self-care, to give and 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 give to ourselves at the expense of ourselves. We often suffer from physical disease, from emotional distress, from fatigue, from burnout, caregiver burnout. I think that this documentary really gave a sort of comprehensive view of what it is to be the wounded healer. So I realized that that really is the bodhisattva, and that really is my life in a lot of ways, that I really do choose to give up a lot of things to be in service. But I went to chakra dance today, and we focused on heart chakra. And, one of the things I love about chakra dance is that it really encourages movement. And I really believe that this is important shamanically, to be in movement, to be in relationship with the body, to be comfortable with expression through movement. So chakra dance is one of the things that I do to regularly self-care. Another thing that I do is soul collage. So I do, and I think any wounded healer has to consistently have a self-care regimen. And so that's one of the things I do, chakra dance. I went to chakra dance this morning. We danced heart chakra. And one of the things I really love about chakra dance is things come through me as I'm doing this moving meditation. They come, I feel the energies. I feel into the spaces. Information comes. Sometimes I do go into my head and I'm putting it together, what I'm feeling and sensing and hearing and seeing. And I'm putting it together with the experiences that I've had for that week in this way that it almost inevitably leads to an aha moment. Today was no exception. I had a few aha moments. One of the ones that I wanted to talk about is after we do the chakra dance, we always will make a mandala, and it's just this energetic representation of what we experienced during the session, and then we go around and we talk about our mandalas just to, seat the experience, integrate it a little bit more. And so this was my mandala for today for heart chakra. What really occurred to me is yesterday I watched David Bowie's Black Star video again. I love that video. I've seen it at least a dozen times, if not more. I always glean something different out of it. But as I was watching it yesterday, it just struck me. He was talking about, in the lyrics, he was talking about, in the village of Omar, at the center of it all is your eyes. At the center of it all is your eyes. And I know what he meant. He was talking about consciousness, being a conscious human being, the self, the sense of I. Such an interesting video. But today, as I was dancing heart chakra, what occurred to me is that we have 3 lower chakras, right? The root, the sacral, and the solar plexus. And then we have 3 upper chakras, which is the throat, the brow, and the crown. And right in the middle, the 3 above and the 3 below, is what? The heart. So as I was doing this moving meditation today, that song came to me because I just listened to it yesterday, where he was saying at the center of it all is your eyes. And I was thinking, as ingenious and artistic and wonderful and enlightened as David Bowie was, I was telling him in my head, no, at the center of it all actually is the heart. And so that's really what this represents for me, with this being the solar plexus down here and the throat chakra up here and the heart. And not only that, and then, what came in was all this idea about the wounded healer and the bodhisattva and self-care and how we sacrifice so much of ourselves, and sometimes we even hurt ourselves to help other people. And, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? What is that? So I was feeling into that heart chakra, that heart space. And I just felt this very profound divine connection that, this is soul contract stuff. It's what I came here to do. It's the role I came here to have in this incarnation. And my soul, I am much, much more than just this one incarnation of Amy Shaw, this and this and this and this. These labels that I've put on myself. I'm more than that. And so it's this sense of, I was reflecting back again on the documentary, and this sense of like, is it enough? Because he's constantly driven, to save people. And, the wounded healer, the bodhisattva, I guess you would call it, can get, a real savior complex. So that's a real thing, that we do have to be careful of that, because there is a shadow to that. And it's that conundrum of, this is my life purpose, this is how I serve. Yet my life purpose and how I serve is also going to be the death of me, essentially. You know, it's going to shorten my life, make my life harder in a lot of ways. There's a lot of sacrifice that comes with it, a lot of service that comes with it. Basically, it's like a shamanic path, essentially. It's hard. And that's why when they say nobody really wants to be a shaman, this is the reason why. Because to be a shaman essentially is like to be a bodhisattva. It's to have all this knowledge of the spiritual realm. You know, to have all these experiences of the spiritual realm. And to come back out of that and to sit and break bread with people that are struggling, that are suffering, that are in pain, that are desperate. You know, it's not easy. You know, in a sense, being in that role, being that person, you know, you're giving up. You're essentially letting go of a lot of that attainment, that knowledge, that enlightenment to serve suffering people. So that is the archetype of the bodhisattva. And so, yeah, as I was doing the chakra dance, I was thinking about that. Just the shamanic path, the bodhisattva, what it means, and is that a bad thing? I think culturally, you know, we have been indoctrinated into this idea of enmeshment and codependency, and that is a legitimate thing. I mean, I think the shadow side of it is we can fall into this if we're not careful. But by the same token, as I said, what really came strongly to me is that, you know, the solar plexus, what's the solar plexus really about? It's about the sense of self. It's that masculine energy. It's that who I am self, you know, very strong on the ego. And the same thing, the throat chakra is just the verbal expression of who I am, what's my voice, my right, you know, to have something to say, to be heard, and all these things. So these are both very strong sort of ego places to be. And right in the middle of both of those is the heart. And so I just energetically, as I felt into that, I just felt this incredibly amazing connection with Source, and how that really transcends these things, these sense of ourselves. And going back to that again, I had this aha moment of, this is just this incarnation. It's why I agreed to come here. It's not any big deal. If being the wounded healer, if it kills me at a young age, or it drains me of life energy, or it takes everything from me, so be it. It's why I'm here, and it really is okay. You know, not to say like, you know, and he struggled with that in the film, because he's helping suicidal people, and then he's saying, well, I don't really care about my life. And so he's saying, is that the same thing as saying that I too am suicidal? Well, no, not exactly. You know, it's just my path of service. And I could really relate to that, though. You know, it's the same thing like the Apostle Paul wrote about in the Bible, when he said, for me to die is gain, but to live is for Christ. And so he was a bodhisattva in the same sense of saying, like, I could easily die. I know where I'm going. It's a much better place than here. But yet I'm staying, and I'm long suffering, and I'm laboring along for your benefit, for your sake, because I'm here in a path of service, and it's why I'm here. And I think the shamanic path very much is like that. Because when we've been into the spiritual realm and we've seen what's there, we know the enlightenment, we know the peace, we know the love, we know the harmony, we know all the things that can be available to us in the spiritual realm. And then we come back, and, you know, this is a gangster planet. It is really hard to be here. There's a lot of violence and suffering and struggle and hunger and pain and loss and a war and, you know, just all these things. It makes it really, really hard to be here. Yet here we are, and we're in this path. We're here for a reason. So I just wanted to get some of these ideas on video, and also just encourage you that if you're the wounded healer, or you feel like you're a bodhisattva in your life, that's okay. That, you know, we don't have to fall into this cultural prescription that tells us that somehow there's something wrong with us, or somehow we're flawed, you know, because we do live in this very self-determined, every man for himself, dog eat dog sort of philosophy in our culture. And it doesn't make a lot of room. It doesn't appreciate, it doesn't hold up or respect or value the more bodhisattva types of people. And so if you are one of those people and you're in that, and you're feeling that like something is wrong with me and I shouldn't be so giving, I shouldn't be such a bleeding heart, I shouldn't be so caring, I shouldn't be so present with people, I shouldn't be all these things because look what it's doing to me, it's hurting me, and people hurt me when I give and I give and I don't get in return, and I'm constantly emptying myself out, and these are all things that essentially we tell ourselves. That's kind of like the cultural over, the narrative that's coming from the over culture. It isn't really the truth. In truth, we're self-caring every day. Every time you brush your teeth, every time you take a shower, every time you use the restroom, every time you wash your hands, every time you fix yourself something to eat, every time you have some water, that's self-care. By the way, I just wanted to take a quick plug. I'm going to eventually be doing a video review on this, but at the metaphysical fair that I vendored at, this woman was there. She was also vendoring, and she came up with this really awesome and amazing idea, and it was based on the rice experiment, which I recently talked about in a video when I was talking about healing and how healing really happens. So she did the rice experiment. She actually had some displays of her rice experiment, and one of the bottles, the rice had been in there for 6 months. Can you imagine? It's crazy. So based on that and Dr. Emoto's work, she designed these water bottles, making a difference, and it's mypositivewater.com, and they have words written all over them. Her daughter actually designed the bottle, and she did it because her husband was in cancer treatment, and she wanted him to, benefit from the magic of positive intention. So I bought one of these because I think it's a really cool idea. I wanted to support her in her idea. I'm going to talk more about it when I make a video review. And again, this is self-care. A good example of self-care. So, I think that it is important to be in self-care if you're in a path of service. Whether you call yourself that, a bodhisattva, or you call yourself a shaman, or you call yourself a psychotherapist, or a massage therapist, or whatever that you're doing to be in service and serving people, a nurse, even, my daughter's a psychiatric nurse, and as I was watching the departure, I was wishing she was with me because I don't think there was any nurses in the audience. It was all therapists and social workers and, those type of people. And I was thinking really healthcare professionals especially should also be here watching this film, just, the humanitarian aspect of it. But, definitely being that wounded healer, I think a lot of wounded healer types are drawn into the healthcare professions. My daughter for sure. So, just being mindful of self-care, but not being overly so mindful of it that we're constantly telling a story to ourselves that, well, this is my path, and this, I'm depleted and I'm exhausted and I'm, not taking care of myself and I'm always giving, and this may be somewhat true, and you may have to adjust and scale back, but definitely allow yourself. I count self-care as a big part of my shamanic practice. I couldn't do shamanic practice without self-care. So every day it's built in. Once again, I'm back at the gym again. I broke my ankle back in July. If you've been watching my channel consistently, then, I'm just reiterating old news, but I'm still recovering from that. And so I'm just getting back on that horse of getting back at the gym. I've gained some weight. I want to get it off. I'm suffering some health issues. I want to take care of those. So I'm back to that, and so it's a daily part of my practice, but I'm including that as actually part of my job, because if I'm not strong and healthy, then I can't help other people. So every day there is daily things I do to tend to myself on every level, physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, every level. I often journey for myself. Sometimes I'll do a 30-minute healing on myself. So I do practice self-care. I do consider it a part of my work. It's that unseen part that I don't necessarily get credit for, and that people don't see, that, is kind of occurring in the private part of my life. But it's necessary. So if you're doing any kind of work like that, it is necessary to build it into your practice, and to not feel guilty about it, or to not feel like it's extra, or that's the first thing that has to go. In actuality, self-care is the first thing of the day that you should be doing before you're starting to do any kind of work or help anybody else. And so I just want to encourage you in that, kind of talk a little bit wander a little bit around about all these different things that I talked about, just kind of what's on my mind, what's been inspiring me lately. I met a really interesting woman at the screening, and she was actually the person that organized the screening, and she was one of the panel members. And I've reached out to her and asked her if I can interview her. I got a pretty good reception back from her. So I think for my project that I am working on right now, she's going to be my next interview. She also is a Zen chaplain. She was a psychotherapist, a frustrated psychotherapist who, because of her frustration, was led into a path of chaplaincy. So she is a Zen chaplain here in the Austin, Texas area. So I'm really excited because I think that there's a lot of resonance there. And although she doesn't call herself a shaman, she calls herself literally a Zen chaplain, and that's what she is professionally. I'm excited to interview her and to share what she has to say about her path. It's interesting. So stay tuned for that. That's probably not going to be on my channel. But if you're following me, get in touch with me and I can lead you over to that channel if you're interested in being a part of my new project. So anyway, thank you guys as always for watching. Questions, comments, leave them down below. You can get a hold of me a lot of different ways. If you just look around my channel, you don't want to leave a comment publicly. If you can take a moment to share this video if something I said resonated with you, or hit a thumbs up if something I said resonated with you. And I appreciate you guys so much. I love you, and I hope that you have a great day.